I'm Fernando Guerra, professor and director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles at Loyola Marymount University and moderator of the Center's Urban Lecture Series. This year marks the culmination of several important events for our city. In addition to this being the 10th annual lecture series the Center has organized, it's also the university's 100th anniversary of serving Los Angeles with its educational experience. Also this year, the city will remember the tragedy of the 1992 riots that occurred 20 years ago. As Angelenos, we should not forget both the physical and emotional scars these disturbances had on our city. For this reason, the Center for the Study of LA is sponsoring a survey of Los Angeles residents and their attitudes and opinions over the last 20 years. This survey will assist our faculty, students, and policymakers to better understand Los Angeles. Since no picture is complete without looking at the past, present, and future, the topic of this year's lecture series is 20 years after the riots, where is LA now? Where we hear from several of the city's current leaders, as well as those running for mayor of Los Angeles in the 2013 election. The series is important for several reasons. It provides an interdisciplinary education to hundreds of students at Loyola Marymount University, and it brings together top government officials, business and community leaders, and students, and the general public to discuss pressing issues facing Los Angeles and solutions to the city's problems. We hope you enjoy today's panel. For more information about the Center for the Study of LA, its research studies, or upcoming panels, please visit our website at www.lmu.edu/CSLA. Hello, I'm Fernando Guerra, a professor and director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles at Loyola Marymount University. This year, the university is celebrating its 100th anniversary. In addition, the Urban Lecture Series, which you are watching, is in its 10th year. Also, we have many guests who've been talking about 20 years after the riots, where the city is, where the city is going. Today's guest is Miguel Santana, the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer of the City of Los Angeles. Kind of a combination of Deputy CEO, Chief Financial Officer, and Chief Operating Officer. To him falls all of the responsibilities of implementing the will of the City Council and the Mayor. Welcome, Miguel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let me talk a little bit about Miguel Santana. He's been the CAO since 2009, August 2009. Before that, he was Deputy Chief Executive Officer of Los Angeles County, the number 2 man in the county. Before that, he served for a very long time as the Chief of Staff to Supervisor Gloria Molina, also in the county. During that time, or in between being at with Gloria Molina's office and the Chief Executive Office of the county, he went to Harvard and got his MA. And before that, very, very early on in his career, he worked with MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And also, he received his BA in Sociology and Latin American Studies from another good liberal arts college here in Los Angeles County, Whittier College, where President Nixon attended. So a master's in public administration in between all the work that you were doing. What prompted you in the middle of your career to go back to Harvard and get this degree?
Quite honestly, I needed a break. I mean, I've been working since I left high school, started a family at a very young age. My first child was born when I was 19. I now have 4 daughters, and just really felt like it was time to take a step back and really reflect on what else I wanted to do in the future. So my younger sister actually went to Harvard at the Kennedy School before I did. She got a master's degree, and we went to her graduation, and I fell in love with the place. And there's a program for people who are in the middle of their careers, and basically it's flexible. It allows for a lot of learning from the other students. It's a very international program, and so I moved my entire family from Claremont, California, where we lived, to Cambridge, Massachusetts. We lived there. I wasn't very popular with my kids until about Halloween, but at the end of the day, I think we all talk about it as a very formative time.
So they all had to change schools and
they all changed schools. And Cambridge is, a lot of people think Cambridge is a very wealthy city, and actually Cambridge is a very inner city. And it has a lot of the disparities that exist in a lot of urban centers throughout the country. So for my kids, it was a good way of developing some street smarts as well.
So as Deputy Chief Executive Officer in the county, what were your responsibilities there?
So one of the interesting things that's happened to the county while I was Chief of Staff to Supervisor Molina is that there was a time where the $22 billion organization, all the general managers and department heads reported to 5 members of the Board of Supervisors. So at any given time, one member of the board could call up a general manager of children's services or health services or public works and say, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. So imagine what it's like if you're a general manager and you get 4 or 5 calls that are completely different. And so as a result, there wasn't the kind of strategic planning, the kind of integration of services. And so there was a decision to basically create a chief executive officer so that one person ultimately is accountable for running the county, and that the board would act more as a policy board through the CEO. I chaired a committee when I was in Gloria's office to sort of figure out, well, what does that transition look like? And so one of the things that we decided to do was basically divide the county into 5 parts. One was in health and mental health, one was in public works, one was in sort of the internal operations, one in all the social services, and one in sort of the culture and the various arts that exist. And so...
is that so that each supervisor could chair a committee of those?
No, no committees were established. That's because if you're going to be running a $25 billion organization, one person can't do it by himself. And so each one of the deputy CEOs was assigned to basically manage those respective areas. So I got assigned over all the social services. So that includes children's services, the Department of Public Social Services that provides CalWorks or welfare, military affairs, community affairs, a variety of services, about $9 billion of the $22 billion budget.
Now remember, we're talking about the county, not the city.
That's correct. And so from that, you know, it was an opportunity to not just take an idea that I was part of developing as a framework, but really start being part of implementing it.
But why would the supervisors do that? Wouldn't it dilute their power?
In some ways, you know, people could argue it would. They did it because they had a hard time finding a CAO. You know, the 5 supervisors are, you know, you met Zev, who's very smart, articulate, very clear in what he wants. They're very strong personalities, and it's basically a position that you have to have a very tough skin exterior. And you know, the former CEO left, and they had a hard time finding a replacement. And one of the things that is because ultimately that person was accountable without any real authority.
So I just want to remind the students that we're talking about LA County. If LA County were a South American country, it'd be the 2nd largest economy in all of South America, only behind Brazil. So it would be larger than Argentina, Colombia, Chile. Larger than all of the Central American countries combined in terms of both population and in terms of its budget size and its economic power. So you're talking about an incredibly large political entity where there is no executive, there's no president, there's no mayor.
Right.
So there's, unlike the United States where we have the president and Congress, or even in the city of LA, we have the mayor and the council. In the county, there is no chief executive. There's only the supervisors, the legislative body, which is both the executive and the legislature, and it makes for difficult governing. So how did you end up with the job?
So
being number 2 in that.
Well, Bill Fujioka, who's currently the CEO and who was a former CAO for the city, called me one day and asked me if I was interested in it. So, and I, after saying no a couple of times, I finally said yes, and the rest is history, as they say.
And then talk about how you got the job at the city of Los Angeles, the CAO's job. And the mayor appoints that and the council has to confirm?
That's right. So the city had long established CAOs that generally a CAO in the city stays for about 10 years on average. And after Bill Fujioka left, they had a person who was there, and she survived a year and a half. So they had an interim, and so there was a public search. Meanwhile, the city was really encountering the beginnings of some of the fiscal challenges that we all know about today. I happen to know the mayor. I've known him for nearly 20 years through my work with the supervisor. He used to be Supervisor Molina's alternate to what used to be the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. She was a huge supporter of his when he ran for the assembly the first time, and he was actually the best man at her wedding. So I met the mayor through that context, and obviously stayed in touch with him, and out of the blue, he called me and asked me if I was interested in the position.
And you said?
I said no the first couple times, and then
playing hard.
Yeah,
huh?
well, I really,
it's like
I was,
dating.
you know,
You keep saying no.
I was pretty happy where I was at, and I could sort of see some of the challenges in the city, and I had a frank discussion with the mayor and about the kind of difficult things that he would have to do during this challenging time, and asked him if he was up for the task of doing it, and he said he is, and he's proven to in fact be up for it. He's delivered on everything that I've asked as part of the process, including I asked him that one of the things that would be important for me is that I meet with him every week, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes with our respective staffs, and we rarely miss that meeting. It's only if he's out of town or I'm out of town. It's something that has maintained a very effective relationship.
Define to the briefest possible way, what is the responsibility of the CAO? If you were to see a job description and then your own take on what does the CAO of the City of Los Angeles do?
Well, I think the CAO is in a unique place to report to both the mayor and the council. So I have 16 bosses. At any given time, one of them could call me up and provide me instruction or direction, and it's my job to get that done. And it's part of the reason why I took it, because there are 16 people that I report to, there's a tremendous amount of independence that's associated to the position. In other words, I have to piss off a lot of people to get fired. And so
let's count that. That would be 9.
Yeah. And so from that, so as the CAO, my job is to provide independent analysis on everything from the budget to major policy issues to, I'm in charge of all debt management for the city, I'm in charge of risk management, I'm in charge of all labor relations for the city. And it's my job to basically take the policy directive of the city council and the mayor and make sure it gets implemented. So sometimes that means being somewhat of a snitch, I guess, in the most crass terms, and reporting that certain departments aren't meeting their budgets or are not implementing the directive that the council issued. Sometimes it means providing support to general managers to help them achieve the goals. And sometimes it means being a bit of the bad cop, and that is providing sort of an independent analysis of really the state of the city without sort of the specter of politics or term limits or who's running for what, is really telling the public and the policymakers, this is where we are today and this is where we're headed. And so I think you referred to the report that we just issued on Friday. That report lays that out and we're
going to talk about it in quite a bit of detail later on. What are the skills necessary for a CAO?
I think first and foremost is the ability to adapt to your environment. So sometimes my job is to be a facilitator and to really not take on any authority and to find the common ground around an issue. Sometimes my job is to be, like I said, the bad cop and sort of establish sort of a line in the sand and make it clear what the city's priorities are, both advocating that to unions or to bond rating agencies or to investors. And sometimes it means being an observer and really, the council basically decides what my agenda is and the mayor does. And so it varies. So really being able to play different roles based on what's required at that time to move an issue forward. I would say on top of all the other issues of being, having good analytical skills and being able to communicate and being able to be effective in negotiating, those kind of things. Those are sort of the basic ones. But I think the hardest thing to find to be successful is the ability to be nimble and flexible based on the need that's required at that time.
Yeah. You know, in Los Angeles County, we not only have the city of Los Angeles, but 87 other cities like very near Loyola Marymount, El Segundo,
Right.
Culver City, and they have a city manager. What's the difference between a city manager in that position and a CAO for the city of Los Angeles?
A city manager is clearly in charge. So in most cities, the fire chief, the police chief, all of the department heads report to the city manager, and it's his or her job to take the policy direction of the mayor and council and basically not only implement it, but ultimately is accountable for seeing it happen. In the city, the power is very diluted. There isn't one body that has ultimate authority and accountability. The mayor has a significant amount of authority and it provides sort of a direction for the city. The council provides policy direction. My office acts as an administrator and specifically to the budget and sort of the day-to-day operations of running major organizations. And general managers also have a tremendous amount of independent authority. So it's really, in the city, we get criticized a lot for having things take a long time to get done. Well, part of the reason it takes so long is that really nobody's in charge. Nobody's really sort of ultimately responsible.
Well, there's a lot of people in charge.
Oh, there's a lot of people in charge.
A lot of buy-offs. Everybody's had to say yes.
So you have to, consensus is really critical. And so my role is to help form that consensus. And so it's because I report to the mayor and the council, I'm able to sort of act sometimes as an in-between between the two and sort of develop policy directives that bring the city together. And that's obviously very difficult and takes a lot of time.
I know that not only Los Angeles and Los Angeles County, but many cities, not only in California, but throughout the country are going through difficult times. And we're going to talk specifically about the city of Los Angeles. But being a public servant is still a great career. Talk to the students about the type of careers you can have in government, the number of employees that the city of LA has. If you add the number of employees that the city has, its proprietary departments, the number of employees that the county has, the city would probably be one of the top employers in the county.
Right. Well, it's, public service is something I decided to do early on when I was in college, even before that. And actually, I was thinking I was driving over here about the sort of the heading of this series about the riots. The truth is, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the LA riots. My career was formed by that experience. When I left college, I worked at Pomona College as an admissions officer, and this was 25 years ago. And in that experience, I felt I enjoyed that work, but I felt removed from sort of the community I grew up in and the kinds of things I wanted to see happen. And the riots occurred, and like all of us—
And you were working in Pomona?
I was working in Pomona. I was living in Claremont. The riots went all the way to the city of Pomona. There was rioting there. And I remember taking my kids and my wife through the neighborhoods to sort of experience what had happened, because this is a place—
Not while the riots are going on, but—
Well, I did that by myself, but then afterwards, to really sort of capture this moment in time in history. So at that point, I decided, I really want to be involved in something that tries to understand why the riots occurred and start dealing with the underlying issues. And certainly in higher education is one way of doing that, but I wanted something closer to the community. And so MALDEF, coincidentally, got special funding from the Ford Foundation to provide a person whose sole job it was to basically understand the underlying issues behind the riots and to report directly to the president, Antonio Hernandez. It was also a time of great optimism in the Latino community. Supervisor Molina had just been elected as a county supervisor, a long fight that occurred that went all the way to the Supreme Court. There was a large Latino caucus that was forming in the state legislature. We had members of Congress now with Javier Becerra and Lucille Roybal. And so it was an opportunity to be part of something bigger than me. And so I applied for that position and got it. Through that, I got to meet Supervisor Molina. And
she was on the MALDEF board at that time.
She was on the MALDEF board and very engaged in sort of the MALDEF activities. And one of the things I was assigned to do was to actually help bring together this emerging leadership, Latino leadership, both political and civic leadership, around a common agenda. And that was a big thing that was talked about in the 1990s, that now that we're now in positions of power, we need to sort of work together on behalf of the community. It sounds easy, but at that time, it was a height of sort of this camp warfare that existed among the different Latino elected officials. And some of them never talked to each other, hated each other, ran people against them.
Sounds like a family.
Yeah, very much like a family. And so my job, I was 23 years old, was to figure out a way to bring these people together. So during that same time, interesting enough, Pete Wilson started talking about immigration and was clearly doing poorly in the polls. He was up for re-election several months later and decided to use immigrants as a way of sort of building support around his campaign. So we shifted from the riots to really figuring out how do we stop that current of anti-immigrant behavior. So I was asked to put together this coalition of elected officials and actually have a meeting with Pete Wilson to hold him accountable for what he was doing. And so I'll tell a little story about this, about Gloria in particular. So, my boss, Antonia Hernandez, who was the head of Malta for many, many years and now heads the California Community Foundation, said, the only thing I need you to do is make sure that whoever you involve, you always include Gloria and you always include Art Torres. And Art Torres ran for the same seat that Gloria won, and there was a lot of bitterness between them for that, and it had just recently occurred. So we had this scheduled meeting with Pete Wilson, and
so Pete Wilson did take the meeting.
He did take the meeting, but then what happened was that Art Torres, he was a senator at that time, said, his secretary called and said, I can't make it. So I called everybody who was going and said, we're gonna have to reschedule it. Well, a few minutes later, I get a call from the supervisor who's very angry that I canceled this meeting. And she was saying that we can't cancel, and I told her, I said, ultimately we need to have Art Torres there. And she said, I don't care about Art Torres, he doesn't need to be there. And for those of you who know Gloria know that that's very much her personality. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you get him there, I'll schedule the meeting. So she puts me on hold, calls him, hadn't spoken to him since the campaign, and got him to...
And it was a nasty campaign. They had all kinds of hit pieces against each
other. Right, and got him to attend the meeting, and the meeting took place. But through that, I got to meet the supervisor, and Gloria is the kind of person that if you stand up to her, she actually respects you more.
I don't believe that. I'm afraid of her.
A lot of people are afraid of her. And so so she asked me if I would actually join her staff. And
But what happened at the Pete Wilson meeting? He obviously didn't agree.
Well, he didn't agree, and it was very heated, of course. And Pete Wilson, the ironic thing about Pete Wilson is that as much as he's villainized, particularly in our community, he actually is a moderate Republican. And today, given the context of other Republicans, he actually would be almost liberal compared to the kind of Republicans that we currently have, certainly the ones that are running for president. And so he was, respectful and stuck to the policy issues of the cost associated with illegal immigration and the need for California to generate funding from the federal government so that they could start covering the cost, et cetera. So it was a historic time, I think, in the region. Certainly for our community, and again, so it's a long way of saying why public service is important to me.
Back to the riots. What caused the riots, and what was the official response to the riots from the city, the county, the state, the feds, the nonprofit organizations, MALDEF, in terms of this position that you took? What was the response to make sure that we mitigated the cost of the riots and that it didn't happen again?
Well, the biggest reason I think the riots occurred is that, there was high unemployment at the time. There was a recession that was in the middle of, the city was in the middle of, certainly not as bad as the current recession, ironically. Unemployment was high. It wasn't necessarily that, I believe. I think there was a sense of frustration that people had and a disconnect between their lives and what they saw. And so everybody rioted for different reasons. And so one of the things that was interesting about the riots, at least as it pertained to the Latino community, that in neighborhoods where there are large, established, community-based organizations, where there's a strong network of sort of civic leaders, you didn't see any rioting. So Boyle Heights never experienced
But
riots.
you're talking about the Latino community,
The
because
Latino
that wasn't the
community.
case in the African
Yeah,
American
in the
community.
African community, there certainly was, and I think it was a sense of outrage over sort of what was a
Right.
perceived injustice that was pent up for many, many years. And so it was a triggering event, but then it became much bigger than that. Everybody sort of took on. And in terms of the reaction, I think both the city, the county, and the nonprofit community, nobody anticipated that anything like this would ever happen in our city.
But it had happened, and happened in 65,
Well,
now it happened in
never
92.
to that scale,
Right.
Never to the scale where literally every corner of the city and the region had some kind of rioting. And like I said, Pomona is 35 miles away from South LA, and there was rioting there. And it just continued on. And because government and the civic community was unprepared to how to manage it, there was also a tremendous amount of tension around the racial issues. So it was sort of the hidden issue, and nobody wanted to call it out. And so the civic and political leadership never really stepped in to call for calm and for sort of rational behavior. And so it sort of evolved. And so what's different today is that
But let me go back to one thing, because I have studied LA for many, many years, and it's hard for me to be able to identify what the response was. I believe that city government almost went on after 6 months of dealing with it and saying they were going to do all kinds of great things, and then they just went on as though it never happened. I don't see any structural changes in the city. I don't see anything.
I think that's true. I think we basically did pretend it didn't happen, and didn't really tackle sort of the root causes of economic disparity or unemployment, sort of the decay of our education system, and so it was one of those things. There was a lot of activity. Different organizations were formed, different coalitions were established, but over a period of almost 24 months, they all dissolved.
Right.
And
Except for the Center for the Study of LA.
Well,
we
there you go.
were a response to that.
And which way LA?
Which way LA started. Also, there are a couple of others, but the Center for the Study of Southern California at Cal State Northridge still
Right.
exists. The Pat Brown Institute at Cal State LA kind of focused a little bit more on city stuff, so they made a change. CLU, which is the clergy organization, and a couple of others,
Right.
community advocates and things of that nature. Can another riot happen? How likely is it that another riot will happen in the next 5 years?
I think it's pretty unlikely. I think,
But what if I were to tell you that most people would have said the same thing 4 months before the 92 riots?
well, I think I wouldn't be surprised by that. The reason why I feel confident about that today is that a lot of the frustration was directed towards police. And particularly in the African American community, there was a sense of being terrorized by LAPD and the Latino community as well. And both for their behavior before the riots and also for their lack of responsiveness during and after the riots. So they felt, middle class Latinos and African Americans felt like they weren't safe, and everyone had a story about when they were harassed by the police department. And so I think what has changed as a result of the riots is the changing of the culture at LAPD.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as sort of calculating, there wasn't like a big white paper that was written, there wasn't a nonprofit that was established or an organization, although Connie Rice certainly has a lot of credit for that. But it was really a sense that what was working and the personalities involved with Chief Gates was not effective and wasn't reflective of how the city was evolving. And so LA really grew up at that time, and LAPD really grew up. And so community policing became less of a slogan and actually became a way of doing work. And so surprisingly today, LA is one of the safest cities in the country. And of course it's less safe in poor neighborhoods than it is in wealthier neighborhoods. That's unfortunately always going to be the case. but it's safer across the board. And part of that is that LAPD is much more responsive to the needs of the community. It deploys in a way that is based on need versus sort of this equity model where you have the same number of police officers in areas that have no crime. And the culture, and I think the biggest symbol or event that really sort of captured how much the police department has changed is how the Occupy LA was ultimately handled. Of course, not everybody agrees with that, but when you compare us to other major cities around the country, I think most people would say it was one of the shining moments for the department.
Yeah. We are here at Loyola Marymount University celebrating our 100th anniversary of existence, also having a conversation about the city of Los Angeles with Miguel Santana, Chief Administrative Officer. Miguel, does it matter who's mayor to you?
Of course it does. And it's, you know, for me, I know each one of the candidates. I know them well. I have all of their cell phones if I need to call them and work closely with them.
They all have their strengths and weaknesses.
Yes, yes, they do.
What type, first of all, what do you think the skills required to be a good mayor?
I think the most important skill is really being able to be decisive and clear about your vision and direction for the city. In an environment where where authority is diluted.
And that's a very important point. The decentralization or fragmentation of city government just can't be emphasized enough.
And so in that, the most powerful position you have is not in the charter. It's based on
and the charter is like the city's constitution.
That's correct. Yeah. It's based on your ability to persuade others. So, you know, I am not in charge of anything. No one reports to me outside of my staff. I have 100 staff people. But general managers don't report to me. You know, I absolutely don't have a vote on anything. And the only authority I have is my ability to make an argument and to convince the mayor and the council to take certain action. So I tell my staff that we're in the persuasion business. That's our job, is to persuade the public and the policymakers to make the right decision. The job of the mayor is to lay out a convincing argument that there's a direction that we're headed towards, and to build the consensus and the support and the resources, both internal and externally, around that agenda, so that you're confident enough that when you get attacked, which being the mayor, it's part of the job to get attacked by somebody, you're forceful in that vision to move forward. At the same time, it requires somebody who's willing to step back and reflect on that vision on a real-time basis and make changes as other stakeholders and other interests and other issues or challenges surface. And so it's a very unique skill. And so that in itself, I think, is probably the most important trait for an effective mayor. It's, you know, and it transcends city government. It's about convincing the public and Angelenos as a whole to sometimes make sacrifices by voting for things that they may not want to support. And it also means that you have to go to Washington or Sacramento or to the business community and be the city's #1 advocate based on that vision and that direction. And so it's someone with a tremendous amount of confidence but at the same time, reflectiveness to be able to move forward an agenda, even when everyone is skeptical of what you're proposing.
Do you think the LA media or press is unfair to Antonio? I guess I just gave that's a biased question, because obviously it implies that I think they are.
I really do believe that.
Why?
Know, and there's a number of reasons why. Some of it is his own personal issues. I think part of it is that one of the dangerous things about being in a position of authority is that when you enter that position, it's particularly if you represent sort of change and hope and the future, that the expectation of what you're going to achieve is almost unrealistic. Everybody's hopes and fears and things that they're upset are basically projected onto that person. So every time you hit a pothole, every time you run into traffic, every time you see graffiti,
you say, "Damn it, Antonio."
Yeah, you blame it on the mayor. Now, he owns some of that. His job is to make sure those things work, but he's not a miracle worker, okay? And our president is suffering from the same thing. Our president is suffering from expectations that we put on him, that he's trying to convince that, reduce those expectations to a point of being realistic.
Yeah, but part of the campaign when you're getting elected or reelected is to raise the expectations, right?
Exactly.
And then you have to,
So, and then part of it is circumstances.
Yeah.
LA experienced the worst economic recession in the history of the city, worse than the Great Depression. Because even in the Great Depression, Los Angeles was still a destination point for people all over the country and all over the world who were looking for opportunity. Yeah. And there's just read John Steinbeck's Great Barath, and you get a sense of what it was like during that time. Yeah. People still wanted to come here at that time. So he inherited all of that, and some of it he could control, most of it he can't.
But what I think, why I think the media is unfair is that they were highly critical of his predecessor, James Hahn, and he couldn't have been more opposite than Antonio. Jimmy Hahn was, I think, unfairly. They discussed corruption, and he's like one of the most ethical guys I've ever known in terms of public service.
Right.
And he stood up, and when the Valley wanted to secede, he said no. He stood up and he fired the police chief when he didn't think he didn't want that person because they weren't working well together. He went home all the time. He would never go to baseball games or whatever, and the press was always on him. The guy goes home to his kids in San Pedro. You never see him at events, et cetera, et cetera. They criticize Jimmy Hahn for all those things. Then they get the opposite, Antonio Villaraigosa, and they're criticizing him for those things.
Right.
It's no matter what. So why would anybody want to be mayor?
And I was talking to one of the candidates the other day, and
which one?
It's a her. I'll say that. Leave it at that.
50-50 chances turn out.
And I asked her that question. I'm like, why, given everything that's going on, why would you want this job? And then she asked me the same question. Why do you? Yeah. And so I think that this mayor in particular, nobody's perfect, but the thing that I think is unfair about this mayor is the sense that he is sort of removed from government, that he's basically looking for his next job and not really managing the city. And he and I are partners in achieving a lot of these difficult things. I could tell you, last 2 weekends ago, I spent literally both Saturday and Cesar Chavez's birthday, which was a city holiday, all day with the mayor, my staff, his staff, going through the budget, identifying positions to eliminate. He literally approved every single one of those positions. He personally approved them. And we made our case, different interests were in there arguing, saying, well, this will hurt public safety, this will hurt this. And he ultimately made the call for those decisions, which are very hard things. Nobody elects you to tell them that we have to make cuts. That's just not what people elect you for. And so I left that session sort of with this renewed commitment in my job, thinking, this is a mayor who's willing to take on the tough issues. Look, he's on his way out. He has a year and change left. He could have easily produced a budget, and he'll release it on next Friday, that basically has us survive one more year. Because ultimately, he's not going to have to encounter it. And not pissed anybody off, had the unions happy, had constituencies happy, cut deals with the city council on various things. And then the minute he left, this ticking time bomb would go off.
Right.
And he's made a commitment to me, and both verbally and through his actions, that his job is to make a dent in that structural deficit, and I believe he will deliver on that.
And so when he leaves on June 30th, 2013 at 12:59 and 59 seconds, as he likes to say, you stay on.
I stay on.
Can the new mayor fire you?
He has to convince a supermajority of the council to do so.
So he can't fire you and then the council has to override. He literally needs 10 votes?
No, he could fire me and then the council could stop the firing. And the truth is, I wouldn't want to be and if the new mayor said, it's really an opportunity for a new CAO, the relationship between the CAO and the mayor is very important. And so, I would honor that. I think it's important. it's not good for the city to have a hostile relationship. But I think, so we'll see after that. And as for me, I'm not necessarily too worried about it. I've been fortunate that the only job I applied for was a job at MALDEF, and every other job folks have come to me asking me to take it. So I believe that if I'm not meant to be in the city anymore, then the right thing will happen.
Something will come up. On Monday, Loyola Marymount University released a poll, a survey of 1,600 LA residents. And on Monday, Jim Newton, who's a columnist, wrote about it and talked about the mayor's race. And then today they talked about NFL football, that the majority of Angelenos support the bringing of the football. We're going to also release some others that talk about the state of the city, LAPD, et cetera. Does a survey like that impact public policy? Can it impact how things unfold in the city?
Yes and no. I think there's a lot of momentum already around the stadium. I was one of the lead negotiators around that, and my position...
So you're in favor of the stadium?
Yes, absolutely. And my position was that under no circumstances will 1 penny of taxpayer dollars go to build that football stadium. And for us, this is really more about the convention center.
But yet, we picked up on this poll that people think that the city's going to be spending money.
And the reason they think that is that there's only been one other stadium throughout the country in the last 30 years that hasn't been subsidized. And so everyone who watches, follows football knows that in order to attract a team, the public needs to invest in it. And
is that good public policy?
I don't think so. I think it's...
Hey, will you say that because you're here in the city of LA where we really don't need an NFL team to create our identity? I mean, we haven't had one for such a long time.
Right, and I said that to Liwicki, and it was very easy, not easy, but it's a lot easier to negotiate with somebody when you're basically saying, I really don't need you. You came to me, if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, then I'm ready to move on. I'm no worse off than I started. And so I think that the public believes there's a subsidy because that is the model that exists.
Yeah.
We actually have established a new model. One of the interesting things that happened after our deal came out is that in Minneapolis, the stadium is literally falling apart, and there was a lot of discussion about subsidizing building a new stadium. And I heard from a reporter who called me to find out the elements of our deal and wrote about what a contrast Los Angeles had compared to Minneapolis. And that in turn changed the public opinion in Minneapolis around subsidizing a stadium. And so the legislature suddenly was in a situation where they couldn't just easily roll over and provide some of the hundreds of millions of dollars that were required. They were now in the position where they were asking for things in exchange. And so ironically, people on the outside, I think, may be better informed about what we did because they are going through it. In some cases, Minneapolis is one of them. But ultimately, for the city, this really is about the convention center. If you haven't been to the convention center, it looks like something out of the 1960s, 70s. It's not.
But I've been to the San Diego Convention Center.
Right.
That's nice.
It's very nice.
I've been to the Anaheim Convention Center.
It's also nice.
Yeah.
And our convention center has never really been an area of focus. It's been sort of there. Only 5% of the people who walk into the convention center actually get there on a plane. Most people drive there. And the reason why government is in the convention business is to bring people from around the country and world to invest in Los Angeles. We bring people...
Meaning to stay in hotels, go to dinner and all that, and it creates jobs.
Jobs and sales tax. And so we attract people from Reseda and from Westchester and from around the city and the region, which is a great thing to have in downtown, but frankly, we need you to stay at a hotel. So this is a unique opportunity for the city to basically get a brand new convention center for free. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to.
But how come that's not resonating? I mean, even when the press picks it up.
Nobody believes it. I had an argument with Supervisor Molina over that very issue. She didn't believe it, and she's been very skeptical of sort of subsidies for these kinds of activities, and I think that is part of the reason why. And I think ultimately it will get done. I'm very optimistic about AAG to be able to attract a team. They're moving very aggressive. I don't see any sign of slowing down. If they were having a hard time getting a team here, or they felt it was a fruitless activity, we would start seeing the slowdown. We have not seen that.
Yeah. Let me ask a couple more questions about the poll and then segue into the budget. This poll that we did, Angelinos, only about 40% of them believe that the city is going in the right direction. But when you drill down on a lot of the other issues as to why, it's very different than previous polls that we've done in the sense that the number one driver to the pessimism of Angelinos is the economy. And it's the national economy in terms of its impacting the lack of jobs and things of that nature. And second is housing and what they've seen happen with housing. Interestingly enough, crime or the perception of crime was not driving the negative perception.
Of course.
Their opinions about race relations, about the progress of race relations was not driving it. And so typically what we've seen in years past, not only in Los Angeles but other urban areas, is that when a city or urban area starts to get pessimistic, it's a combination of the economy, but also crime and other quality of life type issues. You're not seeing that in Los Angeles. There's some sense of satisfaction about the quality of life with the exception of jobs and housing. Frankly, Antonio Villaraigosa, when we asked the approvals on, did quite well. I mean, 52% of the respondents approve of the way he's doing his job. And so that was, they were very positive. But they do think it's going in the wrong direction, and it has to do with the economy. The economy, obviously we all know about the Great Recession starting in 2008 and the housing bubble bursting, et cetera. It's had a tremendous impact on the city of LA and the city finances. And it's your job to manage that. You have to put together a budget and what are the issues that you look at? I know that you talk about strategic planning and you started out with some 5 issues. Why don't you walk us through those 5 issues, then the planning process, and then some of the numbers?
I think the underlying sentiment is, I'm not surprised by the outcome, because people still are excited about living here. I mean, we recently had a conference of investors that came from all over the country. Fernando was there. And these are folks who buy our bonds that allow us to maintain capital programs and to keep the lights on for a period of time.
They basically lend you money.
They lend us money. These are our people I have to convince that we're going to be able to pay back our debt. And you know, if you read our story on paper, it's like frightening, right? Because it is, you know, we have a structural deficit. We've had it for the last several years. We're going to continue having it in the future.
Now, explain what a structural deficit is.
A structural deficit is when, imagine your own personal finances, okay? If your revenue is growing, or your, you know, the money you take in is growing by 2% each year, okay? That may sound like, well, that's not bad. If I get, you know, a 2% increase every year, then, you know, I have a little bit more to spend. But now imagine if your spending is going up by twice as much as that, by 4.3%. And so every year, every month, you're struggling because the money that you're taking in is never enough to pay for the most basic things that you need.
Now, but you know the typical reaction by most constituents and residents and students is, well, then just cut.
And we have, you know.
Cut more.
And we're going to. The truth is that the city's workforce today is smaller than it was under Tom Bradley.
And that was 1993 when he left.
Right. So
20 years ago. So
we've significantly reduced the size of the workforce. Yet the expectation is the same. We still have to produce the same outcome. The second thing is that our costs are driven by 4 basic things. You know, we're in the service industry, so our costs are in our people. 80% of our costs go towards our people as a service organization. So by our
employees.
Our employees. So our salaries, our healthcare costs, our workers' compensation, and that's when you get injured on the job and you pay people while they're on leave, and our pensions. Those four things are growing at a much faster rate than our revenue. Now the revenue is growing at 2% because we're slowly recovering. It's a very slow economic recovery, not just here, but throughout the country, and it's particularly around big cities. And we don't have the ability on our own to ask for new taxes. The council can't just vote to tax something new. You as the voters have to approve that. And so what we've done over the last 2 years, I had projected that in the year, starting July 1st of this year, 3 years ago when I got here, I projected that our deficit for July 1st of this year would be up to $500 million, okay? We've been able to cut that in half. It's now close to 220, 250. And we did it by reducing our expenditures because, again, we can't raise revenue. And
let me just kind of contextualize this a little bit for the students. At Loyola Marymount University, we continue to increase tuition by 2%, 3%, but yet we only give faculty and other employees a raise that's a little bit less. And students are always asking, why are you increasing tuition? Can't you control the cost? Don't hire any more faculty, don't hire anybody else. Even if LMU didn't hire another faculty member, another staff member, even if we cut that, employee costs would still increase because our health care provider increased their premium by 12%, which we have no control over. And that's what's driving a lot of our costs here at the university. It's not that we're hiring more people, it's that each person costs more, not because the university wants to pay them more, but because our health provider or workman's comp or all those individuals are charging us more to cover their costs. And this is happening 100 times greater at the city of Los Angeles.
And it's happening around the country. I'm going to be in
Right.
Chicago on Thursday and Friday meeting with my colleagues from New York and Denver and Austin and San Jose to talk about what we're seeing happen in our respective areas, but we all have similar stories to tell given that crisis. So frankly, there's only two solutions. Okay, imagine it in your own personal finances. Either you got to start making more cuts or you got to get more revenue, so get a part-time job in addition to the job you have now. And so when you can't raise revenue on your own, okay, then you continue to cut. Now we've cut now to the bone. Okay, my office used to have 135, 140 people when I started there 3 years ago. We're down to 100 people.
But you have to do the same amount of work.
We're expected to do the exact same amount of work. I used to have 4 assistant CAOs, I'm down to 2, okay? So the expectation is still there and we're being forced to become more efficient, not necessarily in a smart way, but by simply having to work harder and longer and certain things are just not getting done. And so we're now reaching a point. So one of the things that I lay out in our plan is a strategy to attack all 4 areas. The most significant and the most controversial is, of course, raises that we committed to the majority of our workers during the height of the economic boom. When the economy was stronger than it's ever been in the city's history, housing prices were skyrocketing, people were coming in droves. We gave out raises that meant a 25% increase over a period of 5 years, okay, to the majority of our employees. And when you negotiate a contract, it's a contract. You have to basically commit to that.
Now, but why did the city do that?
They did it because the Department of Water and Power historically has had higher wages than the city, in part because they're an enterprise. They compete against Southern California Edison and and the Metropolitan Water Authority.
Well, they don't really compete against them. I mean, I live in the city of LA. I don't have a choice. I got a DWP.
They compete in terms of who they recruit and retain.
Oh, you mean in terms of employees?
Yes.
Right.
So, and the skill set for the majority of those workers are very transferable to other, utilities. And so our workers were saying, well, we're part of the same family. How come they get paid more? And it's hard to explain why. And so the economy was doing well, everything was rosy, and so the council and the mayor decided at the time that they deserve those kind of increases.
Yeah, but why didn't they, while they were negotiating that, put down, but if the economy slows down or this slows down, it has to reverse?
And we did, and we believe, and I believe that in fact we did do that, and there's language in our agreement that says that, and now the unions are saying that that's not the case. And
so you got to go to court.
And so, well, not go to court. So then the option is, in order to give you a raise, I'm going to have to lay off this person because I can't afford to give you a raise and keep that person employed. And so that's really what the discussion is right now. So
that puts the unions and the representatives in a tough situation.
Right.
And either they say, okay, fire a couple of people, or just don't give us raises.
Right. And so and most people, when you lay people off, it's a very small percentage of the overall workforce. So you would have to then basically give up a raise to help your brother in that you don't even know.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, your kids are going to college, you have demands on your own family. And so it's a very tough question, a very tough issue to talk about, but it's frankly one of the things, if we kept everybody's salaries the same, it would generate $50 million of ongoing savings. So I could basically reduce that deficit that I talked about by $50 million, okay? The other thing we talk about is needing a new pension tier, okay? Where government is one of the last areas that when you start working there on day one, you're promised a pension when you retire if you work there for a period of 30 years, okay? And so in the private sector,
this applies to you too, then?
This applies to me too. So in the private sector, sometimes you get a contribution for a 401k and you invest those dollars in the stock market. Sometimes it's a mix of both, sort of a...
Well, let's just compare you and I.
Okay.
At LMU, I put some, for my retirement, I put an amount in, and the university matches it. And then the university says, that's it, I don't owe you anymore. And you're gonna put it in an account that's gonna be managed for you. If that account goes bust, if they make no more money, if you lose all your money, it's not our fault. We don't have any more responsibility to you.
Right.
That's it. The stock market either helped you or didn't, or bonds or whatever you put it in. But the university gives me a defined contribution. They give me a contribution, I have my contribution, and then they're done.
Right.
In your case?
In my case, the day I started, a promise was made that when I retire, as long as I work a certain amount of years, that whatever my salary was when I retire, I will continue receiving that same salary or a percentage of it based on how long I end up working.
Either 50, 60, 70,
right.
or 80%.
Well, it's closer to, the average is closer to 70.
70.
And when the economy fails, that promise is still kept. So I don't contribute, I contribute now 11% of my salary to go for that pension. The city contributes the rest. And so it's managed by a city department, and so if the economy falls apart, which it did, then irregardless of what takes place, that money is still owed to me as a retiree. And so that's what creates a challenge.
So the city takes your 11%, then the city budget gives another amount, and then a city department manages that money and it's supposed to grow.
Right.
But they could only manage it the same way my money's being managed,
right.
Meaning investing in bonds and stocks and all that, and real estate and other things. But if the economy declines, that means their fund's going to decline as well, but they still have to pay the retirees.
Exactly.
Whereas in the private sector, I don't have to get paid.
Right. And we made the same commitment for healthcare. So when I retire, assuming I work the years required, then I am guaranteed healthcare for myself and my wife. And so it's until I die, so forever. And that is an enormous cost to the city. People, when pensions were established for government, no one imagined that people would be living to 80, 90, 100 years old. This is the first time in human history that people are living as long as they are. Social Security is facing the same problem. And so one of the things that we're pushing for is for reform in that system. Now, to make it even more complicated, the state has said, the state government and the courts have said, a promise is a promise. So once you make that promise, you can't take it away.
You can't renegotiate it?
Even if you agree, I have to make you whole for whatever new thing you get for that.
Oh.
And so we have little room in terms of what we could do.
But on the one hand, though, if government doesn't pay these pensions, who's going to take care of the elderly? Government ultimately will have to take care of the elderly one way or the other.
Right, and we're not proposing to eliminate our pensions. What we're saying is that recognizing that people live on average to their 80s, then the retirement age shouldn't be 55.
Right.
The retirement maybe should be 65, 67, or tied to Social Security. Recognizing that what you contribute is not enough, really, having you contribute more.
So I can keep teaching here till I'm 75?
Maybe.
That'll be a great class.
So those are the issues. And it's, again, not unique to the city. Every major city around the country is facing the exact same issue. Then the other area is healthcare. You talked about a 12% increase. Kaiser is where the majority of our workers use, and some of you may have Kaiser, grew up having Kaiser. They basically have a monopoly on a certain form of managed care. And so they give us a bill every year, and it is what it is, and we have to pay it. This year, they just gave us a bill for next year. It's going to be a 12% increase.
Wow.
And we have to pay it.
You can't go somewhere else?
And we could, but when more than half of your employees are on that system, the likelihood of doing that is pretty slim. So what we're proposing, if you're in Kaiser, you get that benefit for free if you're a city employee. I pay nothing for my health care, zero. And you know, I tell that to my neighbors and they're shocked.
Yeah, I pay $600 a month for my health care.
On average, most Americans pay 18% of the cost of the premium for one individual. We pay 100% for a family. And so what we're telling the unions, this is not sustainable. We may end up having to get rid of Kaiser. So maybe you want to contribute, not 18%, but maybe 10% of that cost, which ends up being, you know, $400 or $500 a month. So those are the kinds of things that are very different.
But it wasn't part of the original contract, not in terms of legal contract, but the original understanding was like, look, to attract strong, productive, good individuals to public service, we may not be able to pay them the same that the private sector is paying them in terms of their salary, but we'll give them these other benefits that make up the difference. And so, Miguel, you know, first of all, you're basically, as we talked about, the CFO and the COO of a $6 billion or $20 billion when you add all the proprietary departments, a $20 billion operation. In the private sector, we would be paying you $50 million, okay? In the private sector, we'd be paying them $50 million, okay? Well, what are we paying you?
$250,000.
$250,000. Poor guy.
No, it's not poor. I think I'm very fortunate.
But in addition, we say, okay, yeah, we're going to pay you only $250,000, which is a lot of money when compared to LA. But compared to CEOs running $20 billion operations, you are at the bottom 1% of CEOs around the world getting that little amount of money. But we'll give you the health care and the pension and all that.
Right.
That's still a bargain for LA if you think about it that way.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way down the line in terms of sanitation workers or clerical workers or whatever will pay you less than what the market is, but will give you these other benefits. So you get rid of these benefits and you try to do the market though, they would still be paid. Now, people will always talk about a certain individuals at the DWP, a janitor makes X or something like that. But roughly, most individuals don't make that much. And most individuals getting pensions right now from either PERS or the local pension, they're getting like $30,000 a year, not this exorbitant amount that you read about.
Right.
Some former police chief or somebody like that making $200,000. Most of them are only getting $30,000.
Right. And no, and I think that's a challenge. At the same time, we have to recognize that what we currently have isn't sustainable. And so,
but it isn't sustainable.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. And so, you know, I get occasionally accused of being a tea partier for some of the ideas we're proposing. In fact, I'm a big believer in government. I'm actually liberal from that perspective. I believe government exists for a reason. I personally am the beneficiary of government, and I want government to survive and continue forward so that my kids and grandkids could rely on government as well as part of the network of support systems that exist.
Yeah, but what would the 23-year-old Miguel Santana be asking the 40-something Miguel Santana who proposed a budget that gets rid of the Commission on the Status of Women, that gets rid of the Human Relations Commission, that gets rid of all kinds of different things that the 23-year-old Miguel Santana thought were very important? What's that conversation like?
I think that, I think the 23...
Which Miguel is this talking?
Yeah, this is the 23-year-old kid. I think the 23-year-old would be concerned about those things, especially I told you the story about the riots and being eliminating the Human Relations Commission. But also, I think would recognize that government has a core purpose. And I think part of the challenge is to make the case and make the difficult decisions of what is it that we're supposed to do as government. The heyday of government has come and gone. The government will never be the same again. This is more than just a recession. This is a complete shifting of the economy and many of the institutions that we rely on. I think that's why people are nervous, because they don't know where it's going. Mm-hmm. No one has an answer, and because there really isn't one. We're sort of making it up as we go along. But fundamentally, like any organization, whether it's LMU or the City of Los Angeles or the county, you have to ask yourself, what is it that only the city can do? What is
that?
What is our core service? And I believe our core service is public safety,
police and fire,
maintaining our streets, maintaining the city clean and safe, and from a health standpoint, and providing support so that other services continue. So I use the example of the LA Zoo. Okay, the LA Zoo. How many of you have been to the zoo as kids? Okay. How many of you knew that the city ran the zoo? It was city employees that actually ran the zoo. Okay, one of you. Most people, when you go to the zoo, have no idea who runs it. What you want to see is the elephants and the giraffes and the lions. And so most zoos around the country, 80% of zoos around the country, are actually run by private foundations. And they're supported by government. So government provides a base level of funding, and that funding in turn gets matched by private money. And part of that relationship means is that government gets out of the business of managing a service that frankly requires some level of expertise. I think some of you, maybe if you lived in Los Angeles, remembered there was a huge discussion about whether to have elephants.
Yeah, Billy the elephant.
Billy the elephant at the city council, okay? And it was very controversial. At the end of the day, is that really what we should be talking about? Or should we be talking about how to keep our streets safe and maintaining our potholes?
Okay, so you're for selling or transferring the zoo?
Well, no, I'm for building a relationship with a private foundation. This will always be a public asset. The animals are treasures that the city owns.
So the city would own the land and the equipment.
And the animals. But it would be managed by an organization whose sole purpose in life is to manage a zoo. Right now, we are slowly suffocating the zoo because every year I have to take money from the zoo to give to a police officer. And that police officer...
Why don't you just send the police officer over to the zoo?
No, we could do that, to have run the exhibits there.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that police officer will always win over that elephant because we all expect that as the #1 priority. And so the example we have in the city are things that all of us take for granted. How many of you have been to LACMA, the Hollywood Bowl, Disney Hall, the Natural History Museum? All of those organizations are exactly under this model. The county provides a base level of funding. That funding is established in a contract, and the board of trustees of those organizations are required through that contract to raise private dollars so that those organizations continue. In exchange, you never have the board of supervisors talk about what symphonies to play at Disney Hall or what kind of exhibits to have at LACMA. Government stays out of those decisions, but believes that it's important to have that infrastructure of cultural institutions. And because they're difficult to manage and expensive, we still support them as taxpayers, but we're matching those dollars with private funding. I am proposing doing this in a way that results in no layoffs. We basically, over a period of 25 years, transitioned the zoo from being 100% run by city employees to 100% run by foundation employees through attrition. And so the next zookeeper that's hired is not a city employee, it's a private sector employee. And that means that we don't have to incur the pension costs, the healthcare costs, the workers' comp costs, and the compensation costs. So it saves the city money as well.
Okay, so who's against that?
The unions are against it. And I think for them, they see it as a slippery slope towards privatization.
Well, it's true though.
And I could appreciate that.
But it is privatization.
It is to an extent, but at the same time, it is the only option we have, and I really believe this, to ensure that we have a place, a zoo that we could take our grandkids to. Otherwise, given the deficits that we're seeing, that zoo is going to close.
When you take the city of Los Angeles, what we call its general fund, the proprietary departments, the specialized departments, it adds up to about $20 billion.
Right.
Okay? But let's take the airport out of that. How much is the airport?
It's about $1 billion.
Okay. The airport, even though it's owned by the city, whatever money it raises, it keeps and it solves itself. And by federal law, if they have any money left over,
they can't keep it in.
They cannot give it to the city, even though the city owns it.
Right.
Okay, why is that?
Because it's a diversion of dollars. It's a federal law that applies to all airports around the country.
I understand that the law is a diversion, it's against the law, but why should the federal government care?
Because the federal government cares that we have effective airports, and they want those dollars to be reinvested back into the airport.
But shouldn't that be our choice, whether we want an airport or not?
Well, it should be, but not exclusively, because it's in the best interest of the national economy to have an infrastructure of airports that are effective and well run.
Here's my point. I believe that we could charge twice the landing fees, et cetera, and make a lot more money at the airport. If it was truly to be run like a business, we would charge more, okay? And then we could give some of that money to the city. However, the feds say no, and the reason they say no is because the airline industry got together, hired some lobbyists, and got them to pass a federal law against that to prevent the city, not only LA, but every city to do that.
Right.
And so that's my belief. So so the airport, no matter how much money they make, even though they can make money, there's no incentive for them to make money. There's no incentive for them to do anything because they are what they are.
Well, there is an incentive, is that those dollars get them back reinvested. So the new Bradley terminal that's being built is being built by projected revenues that are likely to come as a result of that major expansion and modernization. So it does create a vehicle for investment. Otherwise, the other side of the coin is that the city would have to dole that out. Mm-hmm. And so it creates a revenue source that is ongoing for the airport and for the harbor.
And the harbor, the same thing. What is that, about $900 million?
Right.
And they, by state law, not federal law this time, they have to keep the money. And even if they were to make money, they can't give it to the city.
That's right.
Okay.
And the DWP is a separate utility that does give money to the city because the charter allows it. If it was a private utility, then as shareholders, the shareholders would make a profit.
A dividend.
A dividend. We are the shareholders. The public is a shareholder, and so we're entitled to receive a dividend every year. And so there's about $250 million that the DWP provides the city.
Okay, then the rest of the budget is what you call the general fund
and special funds.
And special funds. The special fund is where you put money in to do something, and it creates revenue, and then it also pays for itself. It's kind of like a proprietary department.
Right. And so the best example is your trash. You know, trash is run by the city. You as a resident pay your trash fees. Those fees go into the system to maintain that system. You can't use that money to basically subsidize police officers or firefighters.
So we started with $20 billion.
Right.
Then we get down to what is the general fund?
So the general fund is about $4 billion. And by general fund, it means money that has no strings attached. That basically the council could spend on anything they want. Now, when you talk about the number one priority, public safety, 70% of the general fund goes to public safety, 70%.
That's police and fire.
Only those two departments. And so, and then when you start drilling down, when you look at things we have to pay gas, we have to pay electricity, we have to pay our pension systems, we have to pay, rate increases for the DWP, all of those things. And you start taking away things like maintaining our roads, which are dollars that are matched by general fund dollars. Really, the only real discretionary money that the council has is about $400 million.
Yeah.
So when you have a $225 million deficit, and you really only have about $400 million to play with that pays for everything else, then you have the kind of crisis that we're experiencing. So it's not about the fact that the city, what's the city complaining about? It has a $225 million deficit, but it has a $20 billion budget. Can't you find it somewhere? Well, really, the only amount of discretionary dollars, the only room we have is much smaller. And so that's where these difficult choices fall into play.
We are at Loyola Marymount University discussing the city's budget with Miguel Santana, the Chief Administrative Officer. At LMU, we have had all 6 candidates for mayor, well, 5. Supervisor Sevier Oslavsky also came, but he is not a declared candidate for mayor yet. All of them said that they would reform or even do away with the business tax. And none of them, well, then they all said, if you did that, somehow magically more money would appear. Do you believe them?
No, it's not true, and I've told them that.
Yeah, I couldn't understand that.
Yeah,
either,
it's voodoo economics at its heightened. The business tax is it's a gross receipt, so it's based on how much money you make as a business. And the city does have one. A lot of cities have it. Ours is a higher percentage than other jurisdictions, and so the business community has complained and said, the reason why businesses are coming here is because you have this huge business tax. And if you just got rid of it, then suddenly all that extra money that you have that is going to pay this tax, well, you'll reinvest it into hiring more employees, building a greater infrastructure, expanding your market share, and everything would be perfect. The amount of money that the city makes on the business tax is about $430 million. It's bigger than the fire department's budget, okay? Mm-hmm. And these are unrestricted dollars. We just issued a study by independent economists who asked that question. If we get rid of it, do other things go up? And what they said is, you will make about $30 million over about a 12 to 15 year period. But you better be prepared to make $400 million worth of cuts because all the rest of it's not true. Part of the reason why it's not true is that if you're a business and you have more taxable income, then guess what happens? The federal government takes a bigger share. So dollars that now go to the city will now go to Washington and Sacramento.
About a third to 40%. Right.
So that cuts it significantly. The second issue is that the business tax is one of the reasons why businesses struggle to come here, but it's not the first one on the list. We're hard to navigate through. The right arm doesn't know what the left arm is doing. You have to basically hire lobbyists to navigate through the planning process. We're incredibly bureaucratic and inefficient in how we manage. And there's been a number of reforms that have been pursued and plans that are being adopted, and slowly we're making progress in that area, and it goes back to fundamentally how we're organized as a city where power is diluted. That really is the biggest issue. The second issue is that it sometimes regulates social policy through land use, and the recent discussion around Walmart is a good example.
Yeah.
So Walmart had all the rights to go into this space that had been vacant for 15 years.
And when you say all the rights, meaning they met all the laws and the requirements that you've put.
But because they're Walmart and there's a sentiment that Walmart is not a good employer, not labor friendly, doesn't pay adequate health care and benefits and salaries, there was a sense that we don't want you in our neighborhood. Go somewhere else. Well, Walmart is...
So what, we'd rather have the storefront vacant?
Well, that was the question that I asked. So ultimately, we're sending a message to the largest retail organization in the universe that in the city of Los Angeles, you are not welcome. And so all the sales tax that would come from that, all the jobs that are created, whether they're adequate or not, basically go down the street to the City of Commerce or to Glendale or to Burbank or to West Hollywood, to other jurisdictions, and our residents still shop at Walmart and they drive to those locations, and those locations get our sales tax. Those locations get the jobs. And so whether or not you believe Walmart is a good organization or not, that really isn't the question. The question is, there's a time and a place to have that debate, but using planning as a way of regulating social policy results in some of negative consequences that are unintended. What message does it send to other retailers and other businesses that exist if they can't go in? And so part of it is that which is a hard place to figure out. And so businesses get frustrated navigating through our system while other cities are begging you to come in. Mm-hmm. They're clearing land for auto malls.
Even giving you land.
Yeah. And so that's really the number one issue, I believe, why those issues are why we're not as business friendly. And the business tax, now my position is on the business tax, if you could get rid of it, it's an option, but then don't assume that you're going to have that revenue case.
Miguel Santana's here. If you want to ask a question, because if he doesn't know, nobody knows what's going on in the city of LA. So if you have a question, come on up here to ask that question. This document that you just released, is it on the city's website?
It's on our website. It's available. It's basically a voluminous report about, it provides a roadmap. I mean, essentially, if you're the new mayor.
But you're not required to do this report.
No.
You did this. The previous CAOs hadn't done this?
Not to my knowledge. The charter.
So why did you do this?
The charter establishes that the CAO has the right to provide information to the council and the mayor to help inform their policy decisions when it comes to the city's finances, and to also allow them to engage in strategic planning. And so I take that very seriously. I think I recently had a breakfast with Jack Comfortville, who's probably one of the most outspoken critics of the city.
Some would call him a gadfly.
Yes, a gadfly. I think he would call himself that. Yeah. And he asked me, he said, well, what would be the number one thing you would do to help the city's finances? And the answer is...
That was my next question.
Okay, well, Jack asked it before you. The answer is get rid of term limits. Term limits have destroyed government, not just city, but the state government.
Now, why is that?
Because...
I mean, that to me sounds like the same logic about getting rid of the business tax. Okay. I'm not sure it's true.
Well, because if you're, the council and the mayor are facing a major deficit next year, the following year, and the year after that. There are 15 council members. 6 to 7 of them won't be here a year and a half from now.
Nor will the mayor.
Nor will the mayor, nor will the controller or the city attorney, okay? So the temptation is...
Yeah, but the controller and city attorney, for their own reasons, because they don't have they do have term limits, but they're not termed out. They're running for other offices.
Well, that's true, but they do have term limits too.
Yeah.
So
you're saying that they're running for other offices because they know they have
vacancies,
term limits.
right.
Okay.
So because of that, the temptation to simply make the easy decision, to take the easy way out exists. I often get asked, so what's the biggest difference between the county of Los Angeles and the city of Los Angeles? You don't read about the kind of headlines that we generate about bankruptcy.
That was my next question,
okay,
too. Yeah.
In the city, at the county, in part because the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors, with the exception of Mark Ridley Thomas, were all here for the last recession of the early 90s. Okay, and that's during the time of the riots and the floods and the fires and the locusts that we had. Yeah. And for them, they become like the Great Depression generation. They're fiscally conservative, even though they're very liberal socially. I mean, Gloria was the vice chair of the DNC for many, many years. Zev is very progressive on social issues. But they're fiscally conservative because they never want to go through that again. And so having that memory of what it was like to actually lay people off, to cut services, to make your parks passive, to shut down libraries was a very painful experience. And I was there and saw it happen. So after that, when good times happened, they were very conservative about how they managed. So if there was an increase in revenue, they made sure, first of all, they had a healthy savings account. And their savings account is 10%. I can't even get to 5%.
Right. Now, we call that savings account a
reserve.
And
Right.
by law, the city charter says you have to have.
No, it's a policy
It's
that
a
we
policy,
yeah,
okay.
I think it should be the law. The second thing that they did is that when the economy is booming, they use that extra money not to add to the workforce, but to actually invest in infrastructure. So it's like if your rich aunt gave you a check for $10,000, okay? Would you go buy a car and get or a mortgage with that $10,000, even though your income on an ongoing basis hasn't increased?
No, I'd go to Europe.
Okay, you go to Europe. It's a one-time expenditure. You enjoy Europe, you come back, and then you're done. What we sometimes do is we use that extra money to say, great, I want to have all these great programs. Let's build a fire department. Let's build a police department. Let's hire more people. And yet, when the economy sinks, which it always does in human history, the economy always goes down.
But it always goes back up.
Then we're stuck. And so term limits, I think, is a big part of why that exists. And so part of it is, if you're going to be here in the long haul, then it allows you the ability to think beyond just the immediate. And it creates, hopefully, an environment of greater independence by our elected officials. But
you know you're not going to win that battle. Voters are not,
Right.
Poll after poll shows not only are they happy with the term limits, they would even give greater term limits if they could.
And I think that's foolish at the end of the day.
I know, I agree with you, but voters have done a lot of foolish things.
Right.
You know, like Proposition 13 and other things. But
Right.
that is the law. So within that environment, you're going to have to work with with term limits.
Hi, my name is James Robbins, and I'm an economics major. And you mentioned the city's growing retiree and pension benefits, and it being an economic burden. And I was wondering how the city was planning on dealing with that.
Well, we've done a couple of things. We've changed the pension system for new police officers and firefighters, so they have to work longer now and pay more than the ones that have been hired before that. The second thing is that employees went from paying nothing towards retiree health care and getting it for free to actually paying 4% of their salaries to cover that cost. And so that helped reduce the overall cost. And then the other thing is we're trying to build a better relationship with our pension board so that when they make decisions, they actually take into consideration the impact it has on the city. So we've been able to do that. The final thing that we're doing is that we're going to propose a new pension tier for our civilians so that any new hire has to work longer, pay more to receive similar benefits.
Yeah, but we're not going to see that for 40 years
Yeah,
or so.
but at the end of the day, someone said that 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, you know, it's, you know, making the tough decision now. It doesn't impact one single person who works in the city.
Yeah.
Finally, the other thing we did is in the sworn is that we actually reduced the starting salary of a police officer.
What is it now?
It's about $47,000.
Okay.
And no college degree is required, by the way.
Yeah.
And so if you're 23 years old and you get a $47,000 salary, that's not too shabby.
Yeah.
And eventually, over a period of time, it catches up to everybody else. But that makes it cheaper on a pension because the salaries are less.
Do we have 1,000 cops in LA?
We have 10,000.
Excuse me, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
10,000.
yeah, we
10,000.
have 9,996.
Okay, the city is the safest it's ever been.
Yes.
The crime rate is really low. The survey that we just completed showed that people also feel that's public opinion. Why do we need 10,000 cops?
You know, I think that's really a question for the chief. He really believes that in order to maintain the level of safety, you have to have that minimal workforce. And he would argue he actually needs more. We can't afford more.
Yeah, but I've never heard a general manager either. The police chief is a general manager. The fire chief is a general manager. Every single general manager always says he needs more people for him or her to do their job. I mean, they've never, has any general manager ever come to you and said, hey, I don't need as many people, cut them?
I've done that, but you know.
Oh, well, that's.
Yeah, but you know, I think actually, you know, with all.
I'll take that as a no.
No, actually, that's not maybe not said I need less people, but when we sit down and say we can't afford the people you have, sit down with us and figure out how to reduce the size of their department so that we can afford it. And there's some departments that do a better job than others. The chief is actually one of those that does do that. You know, if you establish public safety as your #1 priority,
Yeah.
which means that it's more important than anything else we do.
And do you believe that?
It is, when you spend 70% of your budget, it has been that.
Yeah.
But we have to be honest about the trade-offs associated with that. It doesn't just magically happen that 70% of your budget goes to public safety and somehow nobody else gets hurt. And what I'm trying to do in this report is say, look, there's a cost for that. And so reaffirm that decision, or reevaluate how it's organized, or come up with new revenue so you could actually maintain it.
Miguel Santana, Chief Administrative Officer, and even though he's sick, he came out here. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for your
Sure,
time.
thank you.